Let's see, I will go there. So welcome everyone. And thank you for joining us. My name is Karen Colson, and I am the Vice President of Women's Voices Raised for Social Justice. We are a grassroots nonprofit with over 300 members in the St. Louis metro area and over 1,800 subscribers to our newsletters. So we're pretty well into the community, which is a good thing. We educate and advocate on many social justice issues. And we're recording this Lunch and Learn. We're going to try to set it up as a podcast. So the recording will not show people's faces, but it will have the words, which is most important. Okay. We have some upcoming ways for you to get involved, and I have put them in the chat. We have today at 5:15 at the old courthouse. There's the Good Trouble lives on. It's a rally. Good Trouble lives on. So it's going to be big, I do believe, even with this weather. Okay, and tomorrow we have the International Institute from noon to 2, and this is a bazaar and lunch to support those folks who are here from other countries. And we have a Do Something St. Louis. That's on Sunday, July 27th from 1 to 5. It's groups sharing on how to get involved in improving our communities. It's at the Cheshire Inn in the Boundary. And then, last but not least, the NCJW has their back to school store, very popular. They need volunteers, so the shifts are Wednesday, July 30th, 9:30 to noon, or 2:15 to 5:30, and Sunday, August 3rd, same shifts. So, and again, this info is in the chat in case you're interested. And now on to today's presenter. I have had the pleasure of getting to know Taylor Harris, and her creative brain never stops. She's passionate about her work, and her investigative journalism has been showcased in the New York Times and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. She continues to mentor young journalists and to amplify overlooked and underrepresented voices. I am excited to have her here today. So Taylor, you can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, Karen. I'm happy to be here. Honestly, happy to lead this Lunch and Learn with a group that's so committed to justice. I know that you all have heard from policy experts and organizers and politicians, but I come to you as a storyteller. My work is driven by, and I'm always cognizant about the fact that the stories that we tell shape how we see power, policy, and the people impacted by both, or should I say punishment? So the people impacted by all of them. Hashtag narratives matter. And today I'll be sharing some of the stories. I have my presentation here, some of the stories and investigations I've reported in St. Louis. And you'll hear me emphasize the theme of power, politics, and punishment throughout. I'll also emphasize intervention, nuance, and also accountability. And my perspective is not just that of a journalist, but also someone who's worked at the intersection of media, public narrative, and community voice. Okay, so next. All right. So though it's a picture of all the places I've worked with or worked for. I'm always telling people to source it. When people bring a headline to me, playing devil's advocate, and we're talking, I'm always like, who wrote it? Where did it come from? What's the reporter's name? I'm always emphasizing media literacy. So I will say this. I've been poking around in you all's backyard for a while. I'm not from St. Louis, didn't disclose, but I've been poking around in your backyard for a while. So I was always taught to introduce yourself. So what better way to do that, I think, through my journey and through the lens that I know best, which is power and politics and storytelling. So our next slide. Okay. So if you can zoom in, hopefully my screen share shows, but these are just some of the stories. Again, before I came to St. Louis, I was in New York, These are some of the stories, again, power, politics, punishment, and the politics of storytelling. If you can see some of these. And
Mhm.
I will go to the next. New Jersey. New Jersey is where I first really began to understand the court system and government. I worked for the state's newspaper there, the Star Ledger, where I covered criminal justice. And I watched one of your previous Lunch and Learns, just also the rollout of the cash bail system there. So right when I got to Jersey, they rolled theirs out. Right when I got to St. Louis, rolled theirs out. And I will share this. Yes, prosecutors and police were not thrilled, and that tension really taught me early on the politics of storytelling isn't about just what you report, but who you're hearing it from and understanding the bias and the background and motivations of your sources, just as important as the facts themselves. So, okay. Genesis, again, just some of these stories, again, from the early my career. I just wanted to show again, investigative reporter, but this is how you start out. Dallas, DC, some of these stories, other regions as well, Fort Knox, Kentucky. So again, I will also add that in every single one of these places, I've always covered marginalized communities and places that have been historically and politically disinvested. So in all these places, New York, New Jersey, Dallas, DC, other places as well. Okay, so coverage area, I'll get through this really quickly. Again, criminal justice investigations, but I've also covered, as you see, international, national news, education, traffic, weather, politics, government, sports was actually my minor in college. Features and profiles, I've always just had like a knack for just the human connection. And again, that'll be something that I'll emphasize in the presentation today. Um, and also, I would say a theme in all of my stories, race, inequity, and triumph. And also, I will add resilience. It's probably one of those themes in all of my coverage. The next one. Okay. I will read off a quote: inviting compassion into the bloodstream of an institution's agenda or scholar's purpose is more than productive, more than civilizing, more than ethical, more than humane. It's humanizing. Again, always emphasizing the humanizing angle in my stories, in my coverage when I approach people. That's why my specialty, again, is that human angle. So, checklist. When I was thinking about where I wanted to move, I was tired of the East Coast. I'm a Southerner. And I told a mentor, I said I wanted to cover what was it, racism, politics, government, and community. And he was like, "Well, why don't you check out St. Louis?" And I was like, I was a little hesitant. But I didn't have family here. I didn't know anyone. And I was like, why? But I talked to the Post Dispatch. They brought me out here. Just so happened to be the Annie Malone parade. I put a sticker there, the parade weekend of historically and culturally significant. And that's when I really, fell in love. I did my homework on St. Louis. Again, I wanted to cover criminal justice. I talked to the people out there. And just to put you in a time setting, this was 2019, also the 5-year anniversary of Ferguson and the uprising. Did not know I would be there for that. Did not know I would still be here for 10 years, the 10-year anniversary more so. But I'm happy to be here in St. Louis and also be a part of this community. So at the Post, I put here community government education, COVID. We were all COVID reporters in protest, but I worked the night beat at the Post Dispatch. Um, we were all, again, COVID reporters. I covered vigils, homicides, school board meetings, city council meetings, and everything in between. This is also, again, what built my work for the investigations that I'll continue to talk about. And these are just, again, if you can zoom in, hopefully you can see. I tried to make it large enough, but some of the headlines from different articles, again, giving me my first hand view of, I would say, institutional gaps in coverage and blind spots. And you see my name on a lot of these articles that I cut out and post, but we also use staff reports often and can talk about that later. But again, this work intersected with, broader justice issues that I'll later talk about. So again, I moved here only just again to report for the Post Dispatch, but been blessed enough to have reported for all these institutions and been a part of the landscape here. The Missouri Independent, they've all ran my work. St. Louis Magazine, St. Louis Public Radio, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Riverfront Times, River City Journalism Fund, St. Louis American, and KSDK. Also, again, just showing my background and experience with the community voice, advocacy and narrative strategy. So, working with the Greater St. Louis Association of Black Journalists, just a subsidiary of the national chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists. Again, I would say we have representation from every media company in St. Louis. They're pretty common in every major city and also in other cities as well. And again, I speak with authority because I said that I would advocate on behalf of reporters. And I will say this, your feedback matters to reporters. That's some of the things that we would talk about, the feedback from community and staff. Also advocating for diversity and equitable and sensible, I would say, sourcing and staffing. I would say this, there was a diversity issue, and it always has been a diversity issue in St. Louis when it comes to media, but we've also advocated for people as well. I mean, sensationalism, we can talk about that in St. Louis. We actually wrote a letter to a news station and published it because we had some concerns about how specifically Black women were characterized. So again, this is a great advocacy organization where I understood not just my organization, but all the other media organizations as well, and advocated for reporters at those organizations. Also was director for the Minority Journalism Workshop here in St. Louis. Has been around since 1977. Again, we talked about that diversity issue, and this is one thing we try to uh, present to students to help solve it and solve their problem. I'm actually a product of the high school workshop in Dallas. It's like for 6 weekends. It's in Webster Groves at Webster University. And we have the kids come out and they present media projects. We have media presenters and communicators from all over the St. Louis area. And it's a great time. They really come and present with the children. And I would say prepare them for the world of journalism. You have a student newspaper, you have projects, you have deadlines, you have a mock press conference. Again, it was a pleasure to serve as director for that and a real full circle moment here in St. Louis. Next, also again, speaking on behalf, I served as a consultant with FCC. I know you guys are familiar. Many of you have been court watchers, possibly. I know that I heard that that's an initiative for you all. So again, just working with the Court Watch Report and working really with, I would say, research, editorial support, but also data as well with FCC. Again, it really taught me a lot. Also the prosecuting organizing table. I would say deepen my understanding and perception of, how the public understands courts and police. Because, I have my perspective after having worked in this for a while as a reporter, but I'm like, okay, this is how the public gains their understanding and how they see issues. And also just talking with you all, hopefully we have a great Q&A session afterwards. Next. Oh, okay. Takeaways. I was excited to talk about this. So just takeaways again, talking as a reporter that's covered some investigations I'm getting ready to discuss, but also just as a reporter and person in the community that's just observed things in St. Louis, wanted to point out a few things. So citizen journalism. If you all are familiar with Real STL News or VOTP or individual streamers like Dirk Brown, there was some tension between citizen journalists and legacy media, but I will say that people called them before they even called police sometimes, which judge it, but I mean, it was happening. And so I will say this, again, there was tension between legacy journalists and citizen journalists, but I would say they filled a void because um, if they weren't needed, they wouldn't exist. And if people didn't depend on them, if there wasn't a hole in the current coverage here, a hole between the media and the community, they wouldn't exist. So I definitely embrace them. But I will say that my next observation or takeaway, stenographers. I often notice, so I work the night beat again, pointing out earlier that I noticed a lot of reporters, sometimes it seems because I get the police reports. I'm like, did you copy and just paste this, directly from police? So I say sometimes, police stenographers, that sometimes, and it's for the sake of content. I know on the both the print and broadcast side, and sometimes it's like, we're putting up a number of stories, but sometimes it's like, okay, do we need to just, are we a police mugshot website? And we'll get to that later on. But that was just an observation that I had. So the next the next was the Ferguson burnout. And okay, I could actually say, glass half empty, half full. We could say, media savvy, but one of the things that I noticed that St. Louis residents, okay, media savvy, unique in that they know how to navigate the media. They know how headlines and angles and deadlines work. And the average person, I would say, I've lived around, they did not. But because of Ferguson, because I know the media poured in here and picked through interviews, and you guys had all the national media outlets out here, that was a unique factor. But also just a lot of burnout from people, distrustful, I would say, of the media, but rightfully so. And I understood that. And that's one of the things I talk about in my media training is listening. And that's reflected, I would say, in the relations between the media and the community in present day. And even some people who face retaliation for talking to the media during Ferguson and those activists who reportedly, we reported that they died under mysterious circumstances. So the next I wanted to address was addresses and mugshots. Again, working that night beat. Power, punishment, and the politics of storytelling. Posting addresses and mugshots. I was a little appalled with the Post Dispatch routinely posting mugshots. Again, just well, I would say I would first start with addresses. So when I say addresses, I mean just including the address of someone before, well, I say before being found guilty, but initially upon arrest, like, those little night crime articles. And just honestly putting someone's article saying, Joe of this was caught stealing and he lives on this block. And it's an outdated practice that I had not seen in any major newspapers because I did my homework and research. And I was not happy with that. I wasn't pleased. It was something I didn't personally put in stories. And I've seen the posts shift away from it. I still see it at times. And look, if it's relevant to the crime, then yes. But if it's not, then, I'm also struggling to see why it's relevant. Also, I would say this, it wasn't a fair practice. We only really got those addresses oftentimes for the city of St. Louis. Other jurisdictions didn't always release the address, even if we would ask for them. So again, it was not a fair practice to me. Mugshots. So mugshots. Again, controversial, but not so much controversial in the sense that we've had people ask to take them down. And this is something in newsrooms everywhere are dealing with, looking back at past policies and ethics and the digital footprint. But I was on a past committee and for the Star Ledger, and we had a diversity committee on staff just for reporters to learn more about equitable practices in journalism, educate each other, but also educate our newsroom and bring our findings to them. And we were able to change that. So I actually had someone come and interview me about it in St. Louis. And, we could have talked about racial disparities or, presumption of guilt or sensationalism, as I talked about before. But I decided, again, politics of storytelling and power and punishment. I decided to actually ask the reporter to talk to management, and about a week later, we had a new mugshot policy, and we've just lessened it. So it's the fact that a lot of people will complain and say, "Hey, I don't want to go on a website and see a bunch of mugshots all the time." But using discretion for when we use them and when we post them. Is it for a lower level felony? For murder or other things, we may use them, or recognizable people. But again, it's all about the framing. It's all about just going over those decisions because I would say maybe back in the day, people weren't thinking about it because, the paper was just there one day and then gone the next. It was a paper, but with our digital footprint, these are things that not only the Post Dispatch, but other newsrooms are constantly thinking about. And again, an observation I had, not just of the Post, but of all newsrooms, specifically in the St. Louis area. The next one is pride, because I will always say St. Louis has the most prideful people ever, personal opinion. But moving on to the next one, reactive versus proactive. And I would say this is more so with protest coverage. I covered a lot of protests. I wrote an op-ed about that in the coverage. their protest coverage, I would say usually defaults to a police account. This is an observation. I would say not me personally. I tried not to. And I would say just overlooking the impact um, of the protest outside of like the conflict and arrests and the chaos. It seems like that's mainly what news programs and reporters focus on versus, what's being demanded or what's sparked or, it's easy to chase the outcome, but harder to track down the root. But even so, I would say like even when we both sided, I would say it doesn't, news reports typically do not dedicate enough space and they're somewhat dismissive in the headlines. Or the framing kind of flattens the substance of it. So this is my observations in the St. Louis area. Okay. Oh, so other key coverage. So again, getting ready to talk about those investigations, but just wanted to highlight other key coverage areas and things that you all may have paid attention to. Again, power, punishment, and politics of storytelling. So Ferguson, we often see, I would say from my observation, just anniversary posts about Ferguson and the uprising and the effect on the community and extended St. Louis region. But I made it a mission of mine to understand Ferguson, again, beyond the chaos and cover policy shifts in city leadership and government and community. So Ferguson was part of my beat. It's actually listed. So glad you all were able to list my website, but it's actually listed there. Just some of the articles that I've covered there, again, politics and government beyond the protests. The next one I'll go to is right there if you recognize Lamar Johnson. The last act of our former circuit attorney, Kim Gardner, innocence case was actually filing for the freedom of Chris Dunn. And our current prosecutor, Gabe Gore, withdrew and refiled, obviously. But Kim filed for Lamar Johnson and was able to gain his freedom through, fun fact, a law that was designed for him. And Lamar had been pleading for his innocence for decades and just unraveled and revealed it was based on questionable testimony and police misconduct. And there was not a dull moment during that 5-day hearing. So, also giving praise to my former coworker, Tony Messenger, who did a great job covering that again. I was able to catch the spark right before it went off, but Tony covered this again some years prior. So, right before it went off, what does that mean? There was a rally outside with just a handful of people rallying, encouraging and demanding Kim Gardner, file for Lamar and use this new law. Um, and so from there, I covered that. I was one of the only reporters there, I recall, and just really seeing, oh, well, the citizen journalists, of course, but also just seeing coverage explode. And the courtroom was a battle of politics of storytelling and punishment and power with the AG's office. And ultimately, he was free Valentine's Day. And I continue reporting on restitution, also expungements, but restitution, the lack thereof, for exonerated or wrongfully convicted. The last on this list is civilian oversight. That journey for the city is one that your previous guest, Jamala Rogers, could probably talk about better. But I covered the Civilian Jail Oversight Board and their plight to even just see the jail or meaningfully address complaints for the Post Dispatch for a few years. And I would say power, punishment, everything gets politicized, even the jail. And I trace and publicize the power struggles. Um, the people that were tasked to investigate the jail, which again, civilians, everyday people, you and I, and the complaints and the obstacles that they face. So that coverage again is also featured on my website. And I will also say that there's always a human toll when there are delays in inaction in that. So. All right. Now we have our investigation. Most recently, I'm glad some of you all were able to read, and so glad Karen reached out to talk to me about it. Our investigation, power, punishment, and the politics of storytelling. And I'm so excited to share more with you all. It's okay if you also have not read, and hopefully I'll make this appealing about the experience of monitors of people in pretrial in the bail bond system. Again, this is before they are found innocent or guilty. And we'll be talking about this for the next few minutes. Monitors themselves are not new. Hopefully, yeah, you can see the screen on there. You can see her ankle monitor. That's how they look for St. Louis. Then they look different for every jurisdiction. But monitors are not new, but they're new in pretrial. So it was formerly that, you paid a cash bond and you were able to go and you were required to show up for your court date. Otherwise you were given like a failure to appear. But now, and we'll get into this on the next slide of there's a new rule, relatively new around 2019, that judges now have a directive to use the least restrictive. And again, we'll talk about that. But again, politics, punishment, and the politics, well, power, punishment, and the politics of storytelling all intersect, I would say, in this story. And story is also one of the reasons why I chose the title for this presentation, because how we tell this story and how we frame reform and who gets centered in our stories and what voices that we hear from and accept as normal, that, those practices determine how we receive information. So another thing. Oh, city versus county. This story again focuses on the city. I want to also emphasize that the city and county have two totally different power structures. I did interview some people in the county, but we will go ahead and okay. What I was talking about before, cash bail, 3301. Again, I'm not an attorney, I'm a storyteller, but I learned all this information and put it out to the public for you all to learn. So, cash bail. So again, 3301, the least restrictive. This was emphasized in the story because the monitors were seen, at least by the judges, um, that they were the least restrictive means for someone. So again, when someone gets arrested, they have a bond hearing, again, because of 3301, requires that they have a 48-hour hearing before the judge, and the judge determines should they be out, on bond, while their case disposes, or, should they be in jail. And judge has a number of, I guess, what they call mitigating factors. And the least restrictive, that could be cash bond. It could be a personal recognizance bond. It could be, an ankle monitor. It could be the phone call-ins. So again, we're talking about ankle monitors in pretrial because again, these were seen as the least restrictive means. And so what do these ankle monitors do? So if you are able to get a monitor in order to get out. Again, there are other options. You could be in jail. You could also have a personal recognizance, which is really just you signing yourself out of jail, or a sponsored recognizance, which is someone, and typically for people under the age of 25 in St. Louis, they have a sponsored recognizance. And so for ankle monitors, you have house arrest. So there are some people who I talked to on ankle monitors who actually did not have an issue with the monitor, but they were not on house arrest. House arrest is after you are assigned a monitor at that 48-hour hearing, or if not, maybe at the 7-day hearing, you have now a curfew, and you are required, you give them your work schedule, you give them any other schedule, maybe your kid pickup schedule. And so now the monitor is set and programmed for you to be within a certain radius at a certain amount in day and time. And when you are not there, um, it beeps. It's a violation. It's a bad thing. It could get you sent back to jail. The issues, though, are that, again, people adjusting to that schedule, again, days after being arrested, now having curfews, again, we'll talk about some of the other harms, but batteries malfunctioning as well. I'm jumping ahead. Okay. So expansion and oversight. So these numbers, if I can try to zoom in, um, represent uh how much the city allocated for monitors in such a short period of time. So relatively had very few handful of people before 2019, before 3301, 360,000 from the 2022 to 2026, now $1 million. Um, and I would say 75% of the people on monitors were charged with lower level felonies. So that's the D and E felonies is what we found, and also misdemeanors. And when we say oversight or lack thereof, one thing that I noticed, I'm not sure, I don't think this was what we had room to report. It was a long report, almost 2,500 words, but believe it or not, we could not get everything in there. So I'm sharing hopefully with you all. But one of the things that let's see, the judges did not present. So I'm not sure if you everyone here, obviously I would think, keeps up with city politics. We saw our current sheriff present his budget and asked the city alderman for his budget. Well, that is what most city departments have to do, but the judiciary did not. And typically they will, since they're using city funds. But I found that for their budget over the past few years, they had not presented um as they, again, more and more money going toward GPS monitors. And again, usually you have to justify that. So, something that I also found. So, harms, jobs, housing, childcare, emergencies, civil rights. These are all things that were at stake with monitors. Again, power, punishment, and the politics of storytelling. So, I want to talk about some of those individual stories. Um, but these are some of the things that people lost. They lost their job. Or with housing, someone told me that, they couldn't get approved for a certain type of housing with a monitor, or, keeping up with childcare. We had one person that said that, his son was autistic and trying to charge it. And again, having emergencies. We had a mother that got violations because she's like, hey, I ran out of diapers, so I went to the store. But again, she has a curfew. So she's not allowed to go out at that time. Or if they do, sometimes they're asked to call. But again, I'm jumping ahead. I'll get into the details of the monitoring company. But sometimes, again, if you want to go out and get diapers, or honestly, I will say this, not everyone had emergencies. Some people were, I would say willfully violating, but I would say also they did have a hard time adjusting to the new rules. Before in the other system, they would have just paid a cash bond, and, you know, paid a cash bond and been required to go to their next court date. And now they have these set of rules and a monitor on their leg. So pitching, how this came about. So being community centered, I talked to people impacted by monitors who had pending cases. Also talked to people in community organizations that headed me toward the issue. Legal, talk to public defenders and attorneys previously. So if you guys are familiar with the issue of pretrial and bond, there was a great report by ProPublica about digital jail. And again, if you can zoom in here and see how electronic monitoring drives defendants into debt. But with this particular case, I thought that, this talked about the financial harms, in which I do as well. But St. Louis, and I'll talk about what they also provide, they cover the cost 90% for people. So we talk about some of the financial harms, not necessarily stemming from paying for the monitors, but again, with jobs and other things. And I also wanted this investigation to dig into other harms, because I would say, like, maybe the court was responding to the debt that people had. Again, when I say debt, people were paying in order to get out of jail in St. Louis and in other jurisdictions across the country. And this is pretrial, before you're found innocent or guilty. They're paying up to $25 a day in like San Francisco, but in St. Louis, it's about $10 a day, so almost $300 a month while you're fighting your case pretrial, paying a cash bond in some places, also paying for an attorney. So again, driving people into debt. So court hearings, tended, I would say dozens. I felt like 100 court hearings. Used to be 16B, now in room 25 and 26, where I heard judges discuss, hey, this is a better option than jail. And the judges had the discretion on who they issue monitors to. And I will say this, some experts, and hopefully I'm not running too far over on my time. I have a few slides left, but some experts talked about the things that you need in order to be successful on monitors, and staying with your social life and jobs and maintaining your child care and everything. And these are some of the things that the judges will say, well, hey, no, you're not allowed to go to your son's baseball game because it's better than jail. You couldn't go if you were in jail. So interesting to see that play out in the courtroom. Again, interviewing defendants, attorneys, families, experts, filing sunshine requests, and a GPS tracker. So I followed about, I would say, maybe 2 dozen people on a tracker. And this is when I would just approach people outside the courthouse. Again, I wanted to know more about monitors. I didn't want to hear from an organization or hear from an advocate. I wanted to talk to people myself. So I approached people, asked them, hey, have you lost your job because of the monitor? What health issues, what concerns do you have about the monitor? We had a checklist for them to check off. And again, this is how I determined who my main characters were going to be. Total Court Services. They are a Michigan-based company that runs St. Louis City's monitoring program. One of the emphasis, so I did talk to their vice president for marketing for the story, if you read it. One of the things he said is, not everyone is going to create problems on monitors, and he advocated against over monitoring people, the monitoring company themselves, and talked about the harms from over monitoring people. And he blamed employers. A lot of people talked about about losing jobs because of monitors. He blamed employers. He said they should be more compassionate. I will add that Total Court Services in St. Louis has about 4 to 5 employees monitoring about 300 to 400 people. So those are the numbers. Again, coming into contact with police, he assured me that they were not giving data to police. That was one of the concerns, I would say, from some advocates, and that's a concern in other jurisdictions in other states. But in St. Louis, the contract does say at the discretion of the presiding judge, but I had some background interviews and I was told that they do not share that information with police. So these are just pictures, just some of like the privacy and concerns people told me about with monitors. I didn't need a sunshine request for any of these pictures. These are, again, violations that people would have. People, again, charged with a crime, not found guilty or innocent yet. But when they have violations, you could see them. They're now marked, but this is one of the privacy concerns people told me about. We also talked about emergencies. This middle picture, and I was trying to zoom in for you, but the middle picture shows there was someone that had like a family emergency. Someone died, and he went, to console his mother, and they noted that, but they said, you need to make sure that you call next time. So again, these are just some of the things that would be in reports online on the court docket. The monthly pretrial reports. These are, again, you don't need, anybody can look these up. They're on the city's website. They just put up not too long ago. The most recent is May. That's what I put on here. And you can find out information monthly about how the city is using GPS monitoring. It's gotten better. I will add that there was an annual report that for the first time included GPS information. And one of the things that I included in my story was the failure to appear rate, the recidivism rate, and completion rates while out on bond and pretrial were the same with and without the monitor, according to the court's own pretrial reports. But I will also add that the court does also provide contract attorneys and bus passes and connect people to homeless services. So those are also some of the things that the court does. Contract attorneys. I feel like I should explain that because the county does not do that. The MacArthur Project had a grant, but they actually ran out this April. You heard me mention 3301, that directive, and so the 48-hour and 7-day hearing. So St. Louis provided attorneys for people because most of the time, your 48-hour hearing for most people, that's not enough time to have an attorney and fill out the public defender application and get a lawyer within 48 hours of being arrested. So St. Louis contracted attorneys to serve, and so they have a rubric they fill out and metric of certain things they've done, and they're pleading with the judge as to why this person should be able to be out on bond. So St. Louis does provide that. Again, St. Louis County does not. They had a grant, but that recently ran out. I would say, I think it was in April that was reported. Okay, trying to move along here. Released on bond. Again, these are statistics from the monthly pretrial reports. You don't need a sunshine report. There's a link. You can literally just go on the website and get this information. And we can see on the bottom right how much GPS skyrocketed. So Kyla, if you read in the story, she was who I let the story off with on background. Kyla at the time was 21. She was 22. She claims it was a self-defense. She was charged with unlawful use of a weapon. She had an argument. She was waving the gun in the air. Was on video and noted that children were around. Noted that the gun was never fired, but someone had called the police and she was arrested for this. This was her first charge. We talked about her plight, and again, we talked about earlier the diapers and having to run out and get that. This was the issue that Kyla faced. I will add that her and all the rest of the characters, they're out right now in society. So I'll talk a little bit later about community safety, but um, Kyla's plight, she was arrested for violations. I will say this with her case. She had a victim in a case, again, the person she was arguing with. None of her violations, so she was ordered to stay away from that person, just so happened to be close to her mother's house. But she was ordered to stay away from that person's home, which was her mother's neighbor. And she received violations for going out, going to the store, but none of the violations were ever for, going for that person's house. Nonetheless, she was sentenced. She did have to go to jail, again, waiting on her case to dispose for about a month. She was pregnant at the time. I believe she was like 6 or 7 months pregnant. And so I talked to her until the baby was born. But she spent a month in jail again for these violations and before she was found innocent or guilty. David, and I will also say James, who is the next one. David so really talked about the mental health aspect and also the jobs and not being able to get jobs because of the monitor. Again, just putting the emphasis on pretrial. Again, people are expected to go out and live in society and also, live productive lives and hold down jobs. But again, sometimes it's a hazard. One of the quotes from him, these people have their life in your hands. I want to give enough time for questions, so I'm going to try to get through these in the next section kind of quickly. And hopefully we have a little time extra. So James again, um, father, emergency, reflection, outcome. He was the one who I said had a son with autism. Again, he was charged with fleeing, and I didn't stray away from the hard questions. I asked, hey, why were you fleeing? Or, you're previously convicted, why do you have a gun on you? And James was pretty open with me. He gave these quotes, job is getting home to his family, didn't want to put that luxury in police hands. And I would say a lot of men, I asked this question because I approach people randomly, but they would all tell me the same things. They had this fear. Suddenly there were helicopters within a minute. They felt as though, they're being predicated upon. And this quote here about, why he chose to carry a gun in St. Louis. And, he's like, I had a previous conviction from like 15 years ago, but doesn't stop being dangerous. Again, not to justify, but also just to give these people a voice in the story. These are the people in our court system. These are the people in our community. So the Brennan study, I wanted to get through this, but I'm also just looking at time, but I'll go through it really quickly. This study analyzed bail reforms in 33 cities. 2015 to 2021 was a time when we enacted a lot of bail reforms. And first of its kind study on national bail reform, the conclusion was that there was no correlation between bail reforms and upticks in crime, contradicting the critics of bail reform. Privatization. And I would say this is more so in St. Louis County versus city, but this is also a problem in other areas. Bail bonds. So I actually saw this person, bail bondsman, writing one day. And I think there was an advertisement about GPS. And I wanted to talk to him about, how his industry felt with GPS now taking over. But again, because of that Directive 3301, no more cash bond, at least in the city for the most part. It's been faded out, I guess less than 2%. Um, and now we have GPS monitors. Well, I found out that a lot of bail bondsmen were now owners of private GPS companies. So it was interesting to see that transition and switch. But again, in St. Louis County, they're coupling cash bond with GPS monitors and also requiring people to pay for them. So notoriety, other places. So I mentioned San Francisco. That's Kate Weisberg, one of my sources I used in a story. There's a federal lawsuit right now in San Francisco because the sheriff's office runs the jails and a monitoring program there. And they said that they have the right, if people are on monitors, to be able to search them anytime, any place, anywhere. The ACLU was like, wait, hold up. And so there's a federal lawsuit with monitoring there. So there's a big national case surrounding monitors in San Francisco, but we've also seen cases with bail reforms in Chicago and Maryland. I will also emphasize that monitors are being used everywhere. This is not a St. Louis issue, and mainly also I would say being used on immigrants. Broader implications. So punishment reform as a guides neutrality, accountability, justice, control, and due process, economic survival. These are just, again, some of the things that people struggle with, some of the broader implications I think we should focus on when it comes to monitoring. Phew. Okay. So trying to rush through this. We get into the next investigation. So juvenile justice. So I received a fellowship from the National Association of Black Journalists and Pew Charitable Trust to examine juvenile justice issues in not St. Louis, in Missouri, the Missouri model. Used to be the model for juvenile issues, but that has since long faded. I would say some of these harms were made worse by the lack of outside eyes and media and watchdogs. Um, Legislators' response often was to build a better jail, and that is currently what they're doing. Um, I will also emphasize intervention often. So, okay, stories reported. Zooming through this. How St. Louis juvenile justice system. This is again on my website. These are some of the stories that I worked on. Power, punishment, and the politics of storytelling. I was at the Coalition of Juvenile Justice as a part of the fellowship, and I heard an administrator from East St. Louis talk about how they had studios within their juvenile detention center. They're not called jails, detention centers, and she talked about how there was a lack of media coverage, and she also said that there was no teachers, so kids were sitting in the jails charged with crimes and they weren't being taught. And so I heard her. I happened to be at the conference, and so we ended up doing a story about that. Those other stories here I will talk about more. I would say about three of those are a set of series. So that is Jaden. I had permission from his mom. She wanted to broadcast. We talked to him as soon as he was leaving the juvenile center. So for these series of stories, there was one big story I'll talk about, but series of three stories where we talked about the parents' concerns, administrators' concerns, the lack of staffing, the budget, how the kids are being treated. The lack of sunshine is what I talked about all throughout my article, but I talked to all these groups of people to really narrow down what was the issue in some of our juvenile facilities. Ultimately, though, we talked about the escapes in the article, but these smaller articles is what built it up. So late nights are ending at the St. Louis Rec Center. Teens want them back. Again, we saw most recently, we talk about juvenile justice. Most recently for the 4th of July, we saw the police department's response, I would say, to last year and previous years reporting of downtown crime, and their response to that. And this was the previous administration's response when there was a big shooting. The Office of Violence Prevention had these rec centers open for kids. And so again, all part of the fellowship. Stories are reported for the Post Dispatch. So the big story. So the legislation that I focused on, raise the age. So in the story, we focused on data, which we'll talk about in just a second, but also um, legislation. So raise the age. You all know that they raised the age for consideration for juvenile crimes. Also, certification ages were raised. I know that it went from 12 to now 14. And I have a screenshot of it. There are 14-year-olds that are certified as adults in the system, even on their first charge. And also the jurisdiction. These are just updates for legislation. The jurisdiction in which someone is charged. Those three are the most recent laws, I would say, updates in legislation for juvenile. So stalled and gutted. There was legislation. One of the themes in the juvenile justice story, the big story that I talked about, was the lack of sunshine. There were some kids that had been in the system and been in the city juvenile system and also in the county that had not been, outside in years, if they had been there that long, and they had not permitted kids to go outside in years, again, because of the escapes, and they're blaming raise the age. But my instinct when I was looking at this story, I'm like, why are so many kids escaping historically from facilities? And so looked at that and looked at the lack of sunshine in facilities, and how legislators tried to address it, but those efforts were stalled and gutted. I would say that I was barred from many courtrooms as well, juvenile courtrooms, as I was trying to investigate these issues in St. Louis City and in St. Louis County. Legislation. So data. Total referrals. So, really quickly, referrals in St. Louis, or just in general for youth, they're not called arrests, or not called arrests, they're called referrals. So, as you can see here, and I'll try to not talk too quickly, but trying to get through this for the sake of time. 20,000, as we can see, the number of referrals in juvenile for St. Louis City and County has decreased over time, right? One would think, I guess some advocates would say that's a great thing. Well, one thing that I found and I was investigating was the fact that um, even though the number of referrals was going down, the decisions that were being made were kind of startling. So it's the rejection and the no action. So we went from, like 20% rejection to now, 49% rejection, and then also no action is included in that informal adjustment. So what does that mean? That's what some parents, and you can see the data on both sides. That's what some parents call the catch and release. So it's like, okay, nothing's happening to them. The referral that a officer writes for them, kind of like the probable cause statement, is rejected, but it's the constant contact with law enforcement, and nothing is being done with these children that, concern me. And that was the pitch for this story. As you can see here, this was some data that I pulled. 93%, if not all or most, come from municipal law enforcement. And I'm talking about those referrals. So most kids who are referred and taken to detention centers are picked up by law enforcement. It's not school personnel or highway or county, it's the municipal police. Okay, juvenile takeaways. I wanted to read it, but again, looking at time, um, takeaways from the juvenile justice system: power, punishment, and politics of storytelling. I talked about being blocked. I talked about Missouri's model, and also intervention. This is a recent court order dated May 2025. And this was a young man. I've spoken with the family, but I, blocked out names and things. But charged with an offense, charged with a shooting offense. This was his first, and he denies the fact that he was the shooter or not. But just the judge here noted that he was not a suitable candidate for reform. And he's 14 years old, and this was what the judge used to certify him as an adult. Again, this is his first charge. This was not a case where someone um, was physically hurt, but also, of course, emotional trauma. But again, youth at 14, first offense already deemed, not suitable for reform. So these things are still happening in our court system. Just wanted to provide that takeaway. So keep an eye. Narratives matter again. Power and the politics of storytelling. So pretrial, jail versus prison is one of the things I'm always correcting people on. But this is just for you all. I thought about this group. Things to pay attention to: pretrial stories, not just the deaths, but yes, we're paying attention to those, but how people are treated in pretrial. Those are stories, and looking to see whose account is centered, whose story that the media is talking to. I always made a effort to talk to families. Police chases. Those are controversial. There's a pending lawsuit, I believe, with NAACP on them. Very controversial because some people say, they blame police or they blame the person leading them on there. Those are stories, again, when we talk about the politics of storytelling, stories I think that we should particularly pay attention to. Juvenile, data, sensationalism, and again, parents. I spoke about that previously with how police chose to address, crime and youth downtown. Pay attention to these stories and the politics of storytelling within them. Okay. Your work matters. So glad we were able to get through this presentation. I know we have just a few minutes left, but again, clean slate, pretrial, justice, safety, and media literacy. These are things that I emphasize as a reporter to others. Updates with clean slate and pretrial. I told y'all updates on the MacArthur grant, and a lot of people do not currently have attorneys representing them for that 48 and 7-day-hour hearing in the county, people charged with crimes. I will say the MacArthur Project has a warrant resolution program. I've also covered expungement clinics, but the warrant resolution program works with people, I believe, also with violent felonies as well. And for those who are issued bench warrants, so those failure to appear warrants. they have a warrant resolution program that helps people resolve those. So again, I'm always connecting, curating conversations. So wanted to put that out there. Again, I've worked with some politicians and covered stories. They've done expungement clinics, but also again that warrant resolution program with the MacArthur Project. And I know this is built up of several different groups. So okay,
All right.
I tried to get through all of
All
that.
right.
That we're
So,
all human. So I'll take some questions.
so yeah, so Taylor, you can stay after for some questions past one. Anyone who wants to stay, we're on. If you need to leave, we understand. But if you could write your questions in the chat, maybe we'll take a question right now. And while we're answering, if you have more questions, put them in the chat and Rochelle is going to monitor that. I'm sorry I didn't say that at the beginning of all this, but does anyone want to ask a question right now? Oh, there we go. Let me see. I'm going to go on a different view here. Okay, Hope. Yes.
So I guess one thing I always see in the coverage of stories related to crime and punishment in St. Louis is that there appears to always be a presumption of guilt. So everybody seems to be aware that you're actually innocent until proven guilty, but we sort of treat people who are arrested and in custody as already being deemed guilty. And so then I feel like some of that impacts how the public then reacts to stories about, the situation in the city jail and others where it's like, well, those people are criminals, they deserve what they get. And so based on your experience, what do you think needs to change in the way that the local media reports on crime and punishment to sort of like start to soften that idea that everybody in jail is necessarily guilty of what they've been charged with?
Right, or as you said, even people that are charged. First, I would ask, and this is not to you, but to newsroom management and what they're already doing. Do we need, this many stories? Do we need to write up, a degree for stealing? Do we need to write up this felony E, or is it sensationalized? Do we think is this more so clickbait? So asking that question, first of all, I will say that often, and I work that night beat as I emphasized earlier, often information is limited. And so all you have sometimes is the police account of what happened. But in that situation, again, reporters have options. You can use your discretion. One thing I always did, if there was a pending question that I knew was obvious that police weren't answering, I noted that in the story. Police did not did not answer this obvious question. If it was a police chase, like what was it for? So tell your audience, what you do not know. Question, do you need to write this story? Most of the time, I think you do not. I've seen it less in St. Louis in my time here, a little less than five, well, about five, maybe 5 or 6 years. But I don't think you need as many. Again, while we didn't need those mugshots, I don't think that I don't think we need as many. And I think that we need to answer questions in the article for our readers so they know that what we tried to get answers for them. And so that we're not assuming. Obviously, I would say, talk to the family too. But again, some people choose to say, that's just both siding. You get what the family says, you get what police says. But, sometimes reporters do not even do that. But that's bare minimum.
All right. Rochelle, do we have any questions in the chat? Oh, you're on mute. Do I need to take you off mute? Can you get off mute or do I need to take you off?
There, right.
There we go.
I don't see anything in the
Oh, okay. So Mary, would you have any questions? I'm gonna pick on you. Let's see. So Nancy here has her hands up and I'm going to ask her to unmute. I have to.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Um, I remember a few years ago when Judge Jimmy Edwards was on the bench. He was really proactive I think individually and encouraging other judges toward diversion setups for juvenile offenders as opposed to arrest and trial. As I remember, he left the bench to take over the police department and did a little bit of a shift in his approach. But I'm wondering if there's anyone else within the judicial system who is looking proactively at those diversion programs.
So I have not heard a lot about diversion, I would say, with juvenile in particular. I would say that usually they try to divert away from the system entirely. And I would say the system itself does, I would say, try to do that from my experience, talking with administrators and talking with officers. So that informal action that I mentioned or showed a graph for earlier, that's typically the take. I don't know if I could point to any particular person. I mean, everyone says that they're trying. I mean, that was the gist of the story. Everyone's trying to solve this issue in their own way. I will say that there typically is a lack of volunteers with these places, and I would say the detention centers that I visited in both the city and county. And they said that, you know, before the pandemic, they had plenty other volunteers just come in and talk to the kids, read with them, and spend time with them. But again, they said they have not recovered since the pandemic. But I would say the system in itself tries to divert kids away in itself. The official decision or formal decision is like the last option. So
I'm curious, when you refer to a lack of volunteers, what agency or organization does that volunteer work flow through?
from my understanding, they are open to any, I mean, there's a process. And so when I say they, I'm actually talking about the jails within themselves. So people can, you know, contact the jail themselves and say, you know, hey, I would like to volunteer. What is the procedure? What's going on now? And so I'm not sure. They've said they work with the Urban League, but I believe that the Urban League work was for prevention and not necessarily intervention. But these are just individual groups. I mean, your group is outside, I would say, welcome to. But there's not any one particular group that you have to go through in order to volunteer with the youth at those centers.
Great, thanks.
No problem.
Okay. Rochelle, can you see that someone's raising their hand,
Yeah.
but
On the phone person, but I'm not sure of your name.
yes,
Oh,
me
this,
either. I've asked you unmute. Can you unmute?
yeah, am I
There you
okay?
go. Yes, you are.
You.
Okay. So, question I have for you is, I was able to get inside the real-time center where they have all the big surveillance camera and they watch multiple cameras and they send the police out to catch these so-called criminals. Every single clip was a Black person that they caught. They went after, and I'm like, does anybody notice this? Have you done any investigation how they present to the community when they do these tours, how it's presented as the criminal is always Black?
No, I have not, because I've heard about the real-time crime center tours, and I feel like, I mean, maybe I could be wrong, but I hear about so many journalists that told me they did it when it first opened. I feel like I missed that because I don't hear about them as much, or maybe they haven't given them to me. I do have a few police officer sources I need to ask them, but no, I will say this. I'm not familiar with the police tours. But now I will say this notion that a lot of journalists have about being a voice for the voiceless. I feel like that is over because everyone has a platform, including police. And so they can frame things in their own way, on their Facebook pages, on their social media pages. And so greater need for the press in that sense. But yeah, I unfortunately do not have any experience um with that, but I don't know, maybe they could follow a media standpoint, and you know, do they have to post every single, you know, mugshot on those tours? But I'm at least happy to not see that much in the media.
Okay, so I will add that after I saw this, one of the participants, you know, she's white, said, "Oh, look, they're all criminals." I said, "No, no." So I did talk to the police chief at that time, and he said, "Well, I'll look into it." I said, well, it's really bad when the white folks know what you're doing. So he said he would look into it.
Oh, wow. Was that Chief Hayden?
Yeah, no, yeah, it was him.
Okay, yeah. I got here right as he was like advertising about that Hayden's Triangle. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Mm.
thanks.
Sandra? You had a
Yeah.
question?
I have a question. Um, my question is, if an organization like Women's Voices was going to take on one of the aspects that you presented today, what what would you focus on first?
Hmm. What would I focus on first? Hmm. Well, of course, it'll be crime. I think I put up something earlier. It said keep an eye out on, and I had a list. I think it was like pretrial, police chases, and juvenile justice. And it's so hard to choose between all three of those. And again, my emphasis was for you all to pay attention to the media framing in those stories and the accident events themselves and the outcomes of them, but just paying attention to the media framing. I would say now, pre-trial. I would say that that's a focus for you all. So I guess I would draw my attention there. I mean, there's a new jail administrator. I know you all have started back up with Court Watch. I remember I went recently to a community meeting, a Power Builders meeting, and one of the court watchers was there and said, like, yeah, all the stories, all the people that were charged, it had something to do with the tornado recovery. And then my reporter hat went off. I'm like, that's a story. So I would say, maybe highlighting that when you do your court watch assignments and looking at those pretrial stories. These stories are nuanced. There's not always a clear hero and villain, but we're looking again at accountability, intervention, and justice. And so I would say, I was told that you all do some court watching. So I would say trying to find the stories that resonate with people is the best way, I guess, working your way through the media.
Okay, does anyone else have a question for Taylor? All right, Rochelle will have to ask. Oh, there we go.
So how responsive do you think the media is to our comments? What's the best way to make a comment on, are there particular people we should contact when we feel like the media is not covering stories that need to be covered?
Yes, and this is part of my media training is what we go over, like when people are unhappy with the results. Um, I would say first start out with the reporter. Maybe it's something that they can change. We're talking about digital platforms, and so maybe it's something that they can reframe. I personally can attest to that. I have changed things and I've had conversations with people. Wasn't necessarily a correction. I've had corrections before, but I've changed my framing after conversations with people. So see first if the reporter is open to it. But if not, I mean, as we will with anything else, we go up the chain and people have figured out how to do it before they contacted my editors or the executive editor or the publisher. And I definitely encourage you to do that because it does matter. I mean, I have, had people contact, and there's been times when people contacted and we didn't change anything and it was just a conversation that I had with my editors. But yes, I definitely encourage, that's engagement. If there's something good or something bad, I mean, yes, engage with um, the reporter, I would say first. But if you don't hear back, then yes, I do encourage you to contact your editor. As a reporter, I had no fear of that. So yeah, no problem.
Okay, well, this has certainly been informative, and we definitely want to thank you so much, Taylor. It's really been a pleasure, and I hope that you continue your creativity in this field because we need it.
I hope so as well. I hope so as well. I will say I'm now at 9 PBS. And so I'm happy to continue this work, continue working in this space. It surprised me. Like I said, I came here just to be a post-dispatch reporter, but that has evolved. So
Yeah.
thank you all for having me here today.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for staying after and for your attention. And well, onward and upward.
Thank you, everyone.